Instead of all the shit talking we were just doing. The Mike and the Mad Dog. What is up, guys? It's that time, the late slate sweat and swap, where we're going to talk about the main slate, talk about all the people who are chafing us for our lineups, and also give you guys a preview of tonight's night slate, the late slate, and the showdown. So lots of things to talk about. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who I couldn't be happier to see floundering his way through a live before lock as all the news hit him like the weight of the world. He's nerd-ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have that new. It's not even the news is behind us, though. It's still ongoing. We're still waiting for the Lakers news. At least Kelly Oubre's out, so we know that's the deal. Kent Bazemore, right before we started, I was swapping him into some lineups because I think Kent Bazemore is a really strong play now. But yeah, I mean, we got hit by such a ridiculous amount of news today. A lot of it's because of the All-Star break, where teams are like, hey, we have one game left until the All-Star break. Let's just give guys extra days off for no reason whatsoever. There's a whole week of games off, but they're like, everybody needs this Wednesday off for some reason. So yeah, that was a just absolute just shit show of stuff going on. But yeah, we made it through. Now we're on to the late show. I'm hungry. I'm tired. I'm thirsty. But we've got one more hour. We grind it out, and then it's bedtime.
It's right where you need it to be for this show to keep our energy up. But guys, smash the like button now. We got 150 people in here. Hopefully that number will creep up throughout the course of the hour and just get us to a respectable amount of likes. I feel like if we have 150 people in here, including our own Pete the Heat Rogers, who you can always catch doing the MMA strategy shows, the UFC live before locks in the chat too. So if you're not hitting that like button for this star-studded event we have going on right now, I don't know what you're doing. And also subscribe to the channel, of course, content like that, the PGA live before lock that was just on before us, all the other shows that we have covering the NHL. It's going to be a ton of them popping up, NASCAR as well, while the NBA is on All-Star break. So make sure that you're subscribed and hit the notification bell so you can find out whenever that content goes live. But Greg, let's talk about the main slate a little, as we always do on this show. And I have some guys that I'm particularly mad at today, but how are you feeling about your lineups? And obviously, you know, for all the people who don't know how things went for Greg today on a live before lock show, where you have to build lineups while this news is going on, I'll ask you, how did you feel about your lineups after that process, where it's basically just a hurricane of news that probably ruined every little bit of work you had done before the show?
Yeah. So one thing that was funny about it is, so at the end, Josh had asked me, who are your two highest owned players at each position? And I realized I had no clue. Like, it just had no idea. I didn't know who I rostered at that point in time. So I had to deflect back to him while I went and looked over my lineups to figure out who I'd actually rostered by the time the show was over. Because it was just that kind of slate where there was so many news, that there was so many news items that were coming out, and we're making so many changes during the show that I didn't remember like which iteration of my lineup. I'm shocked that I uploaded the correct CSVs onto both FanDuel and DraftKings, because I've like once every 2 weeks I upload the wrong CSV, but I nailed that today. Now, will that be to my benefit or to my detriment? That remains to be seen. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it's gone pretty well so far in the early slate of games. Harden is my favorite pay up option. He's playing really well, but there's still a lot more to come. Porzingis was one of my higher owned players, Damian Lillard. So still a lot up in the air.
Yeah, for me, there were a couple plays and a couple things that I got right that I felt really strong about, even going back to the tip-off show where I mentioned if Eric Gordon was out, he was questionable at the time, ended up being ruled out, that John Wall would be a guy that I would find to be a core play. He and Kyle Lowry were basically two of my core plays today. And, both working out fine. The issue for me is really the forward position on DraftKings that I could say got away from me with guys like Saddiq Bey, who playing for this Detroit team today that is playing, it's March Madness time, and they're playing like a mid-major trying to stay in a game against a vaunted Kansas team where they're just jacking up threes. They were shooting 80% from deep at one point, just stay in this game against Toronto and be ahead of it for most of it. And I feel like Detroit was one spot tonight that I didn't know what to do. And the end result for me was ending up with more Saddiq Bey than anybody should have had. And he's really the only guy, Greg, on Detroit who isn't knocking down 5 to 10 3-pointers in this game. So feels great to be heavy on Saddiq.
Yeah, let's look through some of the other games. Also, if I remember correctly, Saddiq Bey got into super early foul trouble. Like even though, which here's something that always annoys me and tilts me about foul trouble. So Saddiq Bey picked up his second foul like 4 minutes into the game and came out. It was something like that. Saddiq Bey has now played 24 minutes. How many fouls do you think he has, Spags?
I assume he's gotten to 3 now, but he'd
still
had
a 2. Still a two.
Okay, yeah, because he got pulled. I think he played an 8-minute stint in the first quarter, and then looked like he would have gotten maybe a couple more there. But I don't know if he lost a ton of minutes. Probably came in a little bit later than he should have in the second quarter. I know this is one of your things, Greg, so I'll give you the pedestal to rail on poor Dwayne Casey trying to play his old team and get revenge, and you just want to take him to task here, excoriate him for his foul minutes playing.
Yeah, and I can't even say too much because they're still beating the Raptors by 20. But yeah. I mean, so often teams take out their best players due to foul trouble, and then they just get their asses kicked for the next two quarters. Like, oh, good, we saved our best player for a fourth quarter. That's not going to happen because none of our stars are going to play in the fourth quarter because we didn't play our star player through the first couple of quarters because he had a couple of fouls. It's so rare that we see guys actually foul out, and it's just this irrational fear of so many coaches.
It's one of those old school coaching things. And it's kind of like the NFL. We talk about a lot with there where sometimes players also TJ McConnell with 61 fantasy points just now. I'm pulling up the DK live page just to look now at everything's going. And that's just a silly number that shouldn't have existed. And Greg, I see actually in chat, one of your favorite guys who now has, who I think is, we were yesterday accused of being multiple people who've trolled you in your life, but he's wondering why you didn't advocate for TJ McConnell. And Greg, I'm wondering the same question as I too, as a live before lock watcher. You didn't tip me off to any TJ McConnell.
Yeah, unfortunately, I only had him projected for 7 steals today, so he just appeared to be a crappy option on pay. Had I known he was going to have 9 steals, then I would have adjusted. But yeah, I only projected him for 7 steals, so there's no reason for him to make the player pool.
Yeah, when guys potentially set steals records in a game, you really can't prognosticate that one, particularly in one of the slowest paced matchups of the day as well with a not great team total here. I think that's one that you just have to take the L on if you didn't play TJ McConnell today. And if you did, then good news, you'll have a couple days off from the NBA to play the lottery. So that'll be helpful for you to continue your run of luck. One other guy that I need to just vent about quickly is John Collins. And this is one play that also talked about in the tip-off today with Clint Capella being marked questionable. And then by the time we got to lock, we ended up hearing that Clint Capella was ruled out, which was my final crunch of the day, was getting out of Clint Capella or getting him out of lineups rather than just going to whatever is there. And John Collins' numbers, this is one of the things we talk about with rate data and how sometimes it can be tough to parse out with limited sample sizes. But Collins had like a 20% rebound rate, so not too far off of Capella. I knocked him down to 15 just to feel a little more comfortable. But the usage was also pretty high in minutes without Capella, without DeAndre Hunter, and without Cam Reddish. And Collins today has played, at least the last that I checked, I'm afraid to even look again, but going into halftime, played 13 minutes at 11 fantasy points. And mostly, I was talking to Greg before the show, just looked like an asshole out there, just standing around watching Nikola Vucevic, a much more accomplished center, basically cuck him out of any sort of success in fantasy. And I have to ask you, Greg, did you get any John Collins? Because Capella being out, this is a guy who rebounds at one of the highest rates in the league. Does feel like John Collins should be at least slightly more competent than he is today, in which he is doing absolutely nothing.
You know what's funny is that was one of the things when Josh and I were doing the show is we were talking about players that we regretted not having. And I'd said, I regret not having John Collins. I feel less regretful now, but I didn't have him projected very well. And I felt like he should have been in a spot that would have come out better. But the real issue for me was on FanDuel. John Collins was 7,700, Kristaps Porzingis 7,800. And I had Porzingis projected for so many more fantasy points in that range. I mean, off the top of my head, I had Porzingis for something like 9 more fantasy points that it just made it so I couldn't even force my way to John Collins at all. I think it was either 0 or 1% of John Collins.
Yeah, actually on FanDuel, I played a few FanDuel laps recently because I've talked about on here trying to diversify a little bit from DraftKings, and FanDuel's been working out decently for me lately. And I also have a little more time without doing the live before lock shows the last couple days because of our schedules moving around for our pal Wafi having a beautiful baby girl. So congratulations to him. If you want to congratulate him on social media, feel free to do that too. And not be weird, I guess would be the other caveat I would say, which you always have to make sure to say to a YouTube.
If you want to be weird, then message me. If you want to be nice, then go message Wafi.
Yeah, don't ruin a guy's first day being a dad, but definitely nice news for the whole Awesemo family, and of course the Loughran family. Probably more so than the Awesemo family, I'd say. But either way, I had a little more time to play FanDuel, and my clever wrinkle on FanDuel today, Greg, was to play a little bit of John Collins with Porzingis, because that way, same price point, who's going to do that? And it's not looking the best so far.
No, I mean, well, Porzingis didn't really do all that much in the first quarter either, but I'm not like overly concerned about him. He could always be the Alec Burks guy who maybe scores 30 fantasy points in the fourth quarter. Maybe it's like Alec Burks yesterday where he scores 0 fantasy points in the fourth quarter. You never know. You never know how it's going to go late in the game, but all the fantasy points in each quarter, they all count the same.
So we'll talk about the news that we know so far for the late slate and discuss some of the swap optimizing that potentially you can do. I know Greg was doing some of his own as we were starting the show here. We got the news that Damian Jones is going to be starting for the Lakers today. So the assumption is that Montrezl Harrell will be back off the bench, a spot where hopefully he'll be looking a little better, playing not even against Rashawn Holmes in that second unit, playing against whatever Flotsam is going to be in there with no Whiteside for the Kings. But also we know that Kent Bazemore is going to be starting for the Warriors today with Kelly Oubre, who hurt his wrist in practice yesterday. And Greg, I'll ask you, because we don't know the status of Talen Horton-Tucker, his starting. I think the assumption that Greg and I worked out before the show that the Lakers will be starting, or likely to be starting, Damian Jones, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Schroeder, and then Markieff Morris as the starting five there. So knowing what we know, that Bazemore is starting and THT may not be unless Kuzma's out, Greg, how are you handling that? Does THT take a big bump downwards for you with Bazemore's minutes certainly being a little more secure as a starter?
All right, so there's a couple of variables here because we still have Kyle Kuzma is questionable and Alex Caruso is questionable. So if both of them play, I currently have Kent Bazemore project for more fantasy points than both Markieff Morris and more fantasy points than I have projected for Talen Horton-Tucker. However, if we see both Alex Caruso and Kyle Kuzma sit, then I suspect I'm going to have Talen Horton-Tucker project for the most fantasy points of the two, Bazemore the second most, and Markieff Morris the third most. But there's still a lot of variables there because Caruso could end up playing. Caruso could end up starting for all we know. Kuzma could end up out. So there's a bunch of iterations there where one or two of Caruso and Kuzma could play, and then we don't know what the Lakers starting lineup is going to be depending on those injury news. So it's still a little bit up in the air. But as of right now, Kent Bazemore is my favorite value play of what's left in the last two games.
Yeah, so I don't know if we got a minutes update here, but I just want to make sure that we're accurate with this. Because in the most recent run that I had pulled from Awesemo, where again, I used the minutes here to build my projection, Talen Horton-Tucker projected for 23 minutes now. So he did get a little bit of a drop downwards in the assumption that he may not start here unless Kyle Kuzma gets ruled out. That said, I still would have Horton-Tucker with the rates that he's shown in games without LeBron and AD, which is about a 25% usage rate and a 25% assist rate. I still think that Horton-Tucker is the better play than Bazemore. And I think that's sort of where I'm having an issue today is that I think Horton-Tucker is a better play. I think Bazemore is going to be less owned because of what we talk about a lot on this show. A lot of people don't like to swap optimize. And Awesemo even did a game plan video today talking about some of his own struggles swap optimizing and trying to keep the control he has over his exposures and all of that and how that looked relative to some tournament lineups. So worthwhile video to check out if you're not a premium member. And if you are a premium member, and if you're not, make sure to go to awesemo.com/join and get one of the packages on there. You can see the game plan videos every day. But I feel like, to me, I still like Horton-Tucker more. And I don't know that that's the wisest move to just ride with a guy who's been chalky all day, Greg. So do you think there's value in just switching to Horton or switching to Bazemore in the hopes that you're getting a lower owned guy who projection wise isn't so far off?
Yeah, I prefer Kent Bazemore right now. So I have Talen Horton-Tucker projected for right around 20 fantasy points at the moment. This is assuming he comes off the bench and Caruso and Kuzma both play. Whereas Kent Bazemore projected for about 25 fantasy points. I have Kent Bazemore starting and playing 30 minutes in place of Kelly Oubre. And by the way, I think the upside for Bazemore's minutes is pretty substantial right now. So even though I gave him 30, I mean, I think it's potential for Bazemore to play 32 minutes. I think he could play 34. I think he's actually more likely to play over 30 minutes than under 30 minutes at this point. And he has officially been named the starter. So yeah, I very strongly prefer Bazemore to those other options right now, especially considering the ownership.
Is it possible that Bazemore is the better play now for the main slate, whereas because people are going to be building from scratch basically for both the showdown and for the late slate? The showdown has some big tournaments for the Golden State Portland game today, not for the Lakers Kings game, unfortunately. So you can't get your super value guys a captain there. But do you feel like it's a spot, because this is kind of the way that I'm viewing it, and I'm still going to play it the wrong way because that's just where I am mentally today. But Bazemore, I feel like swapping to him on the main slate would be the move. But I feel like on the night slate, because people now are going to have some degree of discomfort with Horton-Tucker, that he'll be less owned than he would have been normally. Does that make any sense to you? I mean, I honestly wouldn't have an issue playing both guys together. I think that's a perfectly fine build too. But do you have any thoughts about that, and where maybe one guy's more valuable in one of these situations and the other guy might be for the slate that we actually are going to have all the information for?
Yeah, play both of them on the late slate, especially because we have Damian Lillard and Steph Curry to pay up for. So I think it makes a whole lot of sense to get exposure to both of them because we have enough positional flexibility to be able to do it on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So Kent Bazemore, by the way, also his numbers so far this year, he's scoring 15 and a half DraftKings points per game in 16 and a half minutes. So we're talking about somebody who's scoring right around a fantasy point per minute and is probably looking around 30 minutes of playing time today. So with that in mind, I mean, Kent Bazemore, I think even saying projecting for 25 fantasy points might be pessimistic considering what we've seen from his rates this season.
No, I agree. I mean, he's been definitely a more productive player this year. The rates that I could pull for him without Kelly Oubre on the floor and with, I put Draymond Green mostly for my comparison minutes for Golden State because I think he's the one that sort of materially affects a lot of these guys, including Steph Curry, whose usage has taken a drop and his assist rate have taken a drop since Draymond's been back in the rotation, looking more like his old self. But Bazemore is still a 20% usage rate for him. The assist rate for him isn't bad. He 14% is what I have, Matt. He rebounds at about a 10% rate. Like Bazemore is he's a guy that I think when he was on the Kings in particular, just people forgot about him entirely. When he was on the Hawks, he was overpaid and I think people were not going there. But he's a dude that I know, Greg, you love the historical price things, but historically, like he was a guy that was like a 6K player when he was in Atlanta. And it seems like he's at least close to that level, if not better.
Yeah, I mean, the permanent rates are all there. The only difference is just he doesn't get as many minutes now, but I don't see any reason he wouldn't get the minutes. Steve Kerr has gone to him a few times this year when they've been shorthanded. The game against Miami, he played 38 minutes and scored 48 fantasy points. So it's not like we haven't seen him play extended minutes and do well in those times. We just haven't seen him move into the starting lineup. So it's reasonable to think his usage is a little bit lower playing alongside Steph Curry, but still it's not like the Warriors have some high usage lineup. Draymond doesn't take shots. Kevin Looney doesn't take shots. So Bazemore's still going to have, in my opinion, a pretty substantial usage rate.
Yeah, Oubre is leaving behind a 21.5% usage rate for himself. So I think the normal assumption could be that Bazemore can have a little bit less than that. And I think he's still going to look like a very solid play. So I agree. Like, I think he looks good. I would still personally want more Talen Horton-Tucker, but that's going to be me. And that's going to be the death of me today based on the other plays that I've made today and dug my heels in on. Our producer, Chris, also points out that we now have the 10th steal for TJ McConnell. So there we go. The triple double for TJ McConnell. And really, I'm so glad we tatted him all day long on the channel.
Which, by the way, also here, I'm just going to add this about TJ McConnell because people are saying, oh, not having TJ McConnell ruined the slate for me. TJ McConnell's ownership on FanDuel, the stupid contest will load, is 0.8%. So there's no situation where it's like, oh, no TJ McConnell, no cash. There's not enough players to fill the spots. So it has to, like, yes, almost everybody who cashes today won't have TJ McConnell because very few people rostered him on DraftKings. He's not even in the top lineups right now. So I have no clue what his ownership is on. He might be 0% owned on DraftKings.
Actually, let's do this for the thought exercise part of it because I have the contest page here and I'll do the export of the CSV to see. Sadiq Bey now not even playing in crunch time for Detroit. So this is Sadiq Bey and John Collins are going to leave today as two of my arch enemies, and I hope we'll all remember this. So when I curse their names in the future, harken back to this day. Also, LaMelo Ball playing like absolute dog shit. So,
by the way, according to Tank the Shy Guy Baby in the YouTube chat, he says that he is 0.22% owned.
Let's see. I have the contest standings coming up here. So let's see. This is the big tournament on DK, the whatever $20 one that they had today. TJ McConnell is 0.30 in that one.
Yeah. So ideally, would he have scored less fantasy points and would it be less annoying? Yes, except I'm not even convinced the winning lineup is going to have him in just because there's so few players that play him. Like, yeah, like obviously if you're just building the optimal lineup in hindsight and saying this is the lineup that would have scored the most points, TJ McConnell would be in it, except he didn't ruin the slate.
Yeah, I agree. There's going to be a lot of ownership coming up late too. Jalen Brunson's 46% owned, so that's pretty high. Harden ended up 46% owned. He's playing really well, but I think still people chasing that revenge narrative a little bit higher than maybe they should, though. Honestly, with another 17 minutes left in the game, he could easily score 100 in this game overall. But yeah, I think there's still a lot of ownership coming around. So I guess this is the question I would have for you. How much do you think THT is going to be owned in the late slate? And how much or not in the late slate, but in the main slate for the late games? We'll talk more about the late slate specifically coming up in a second. But how are you feeling about his ownership here? Do you think he comes down a bit because people have so many roster spots left behind here? It just feels like there isn't enough chalk in the early games. And even guys like Kyle Lowry, only 27% owned on DK, Porzingis only 25%. I feel like there's a lot of like swap optimization that could be going on for people out there.
Yeah, so at least on the last run of ownership we did, Talen Horton-Tucker is projected to have the most ownership on the slate on DraftKings. On FanDuel, he is projected to have the Here, he's projected to be over 20% owned on FanDuel as well. So, yeah, I mean, I still think he's going to be pretty popular regardless of what happens with the news here. But given what we're looking at with ownership right now, that's one of the other reasons I think that Kent Bazemore is the better GPP play. Now, with that said, we still don't have that news on Kyle Kuzma and Alex Caruso. And given the way injuries have gone, we might not know until 10 minutes after the game actually locks anyway. We might not even get the news while we're doing the show. But as it stands now, yeah, I think Kent Bazemore is a better play than Taylor Horton-Tucker.
Yeah, and people saying that McConnell's definitely going to be in the winning tournament lineup. I mean, there's a decent possibility because he's creating such a high point total at a reasonable salary. So he's going to be, 11 or 12x or whatever he's at right now. But because he's so low owned, this is just a general thought thing, but like all it takes is some of these guys who played him playing the Sadiq Bays or the John Collins, the guys that we talked about, or who I hate. Like if you played both of them in a lineup with TJ McConnell, you're probably not going to end up that great. So I don't think it's a sure thing he gets there. And it's one of those plays too. You can't ever kill yourself for missing out on a day like this one because he wasn't on people's radar. And we talk about it a lot on the shows, but the reason plays get high owned, the reason that plays become chalk is because on paper, they're good plays that are going to be uniformly agreed upon across the industry. And TJ McConnell, at this price point, has had tournament upside a bunch of times, but you can never sort of be like, oh yeah, he's going to have an outlier day like this one. So I don't think it's a foregone conclusion by any stretch that TJ McConnell's in a winning lineup.
Yeah, so he's clearly going to be in the optimal lineup. If, like yes. I said, if you're just rebuilding the lineup, but he might not be in the first place lineup just because, for all we know, everybody who rosters him is one of those donks who just builds their lineup early in the day. It's like I'm rostering 8 players from the first game on the slate, and that could very well be how TJ McConnell ended up in a bunch of lineups. But yeah, it just depends who else is in the lineup with him because there's very few lineups that are going to have him overall.
All right, guys, and hit the like button here. We need about 16 likes to get to 100, and that feels like a very reasonable number given that we've got 390 people in here. And we are also going to give you guys the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for both the night slate and the showdown between Portland and Golden State. So smash that like button now. Get us up as high as you can here. Show a little community pride for all of us here trying to make sense of this night slate. We had one question here from Arcathelza that I think is interesting, and let me just scroll away from it. Lakers missing whole starting lineup. Why play Bazemore? And I think it's an interesting question that people may have out there because there is a lot of obvious value for the Lakers when you have 2 incredibly high usage ball dominant guys out of the lineup, like LeBron, like AD. There is going to be some sort of opportunity left behind, and there is even sort of a pecking order for the Lakers. But that said, like there's nothing stopping you from playing Schroeder. I know in the lineup that I built, there's nothing stopping you or me from playing Schroeder, Harrell, Horton, Tucker, Markieff Morris. If you wanted to play KCP, you can. You could play Kuzma. Like you could still play 4 of these guys, 4 of these Lakers, and get in Bazemore. And I don't think that's a bad strategy at all for a Lakers team that still has a 110.3 implied total here. And it's playing a terrible Sacramento team. But Greg, I guess make the case for people because you've mentioned Kent Bazemore. We're both on the same page about him being a solid play who's looked better than people may realize. But what's the argument for you playing him when you do have so many Lakers players there who are also going to have increased opportunity?
All right. So as of now, I have the Lakers playing 11 guys tonight. And that is a very deep rotation. So I don't think that there's any guarantee, unless we get news, I have to keep reiterating this, depending on what happens with the news of Kyle Kuzma and Alex Caruso, I don't think the Lakers have to give a ton of minutes to any one particular cheap guy. Right now, I have Dennis Schroeder, Kyle Kuzma, Montrezl Harrell, Markieff Morris, Taylor Horton-Tucker, KCP, Alex Caruso, Damian Jones is starting, Wesley Matthews, Alfonso McKinney, and Jared Dudley all picking up minutes for the Lakers. So the only guy on the entire team I have playing over 30 minutes right now is Dennis Schroeder.
Yeah, I think that's sort of how I feel about it too with the Lakers. And I get it. Like, I just don't think, there is something to playing too much value, but we mentioned it earlier on the show. And I think it's something that's worth addressing for some of the people starting to file in now that the tweets are out there and all that. Like getting to Steph Curry and Damian Lillard, I think you need to play Lakers value and need to play Lakers mid-tier, mid-priced guys and need to play Bazemore. And that's sort of the construction I went to. I don't want to give away my lineup build fully so you guys can't dupe it, even though I'm sure it'll be heavily duped already. But I feel like that's the thing. If you're playing Curry, who gets a boost with no Oubre, and Lillard, who has historically put it on Golden State in a very meaningful way, like that's the head-to-head battle you want. It's probably going to be a popular construction. But my hope is that if I have 4 Lakers, or even if I had 5, like having those guys in there, maybe that's the way you get different while still getting to Curry and Lillard.
Yeah, and the other thing too is if we're just talking about the late slate specifically, I think you want to play multiple of these guys anyway. You made that point before. Would you rather play THT? Would you rather play Kent Bazemore? Would you rather play both? And since there are spend up options, I think you want to play both on the late slate anyway. So at the end of the day, we're talking about which one would you rather play. It's kind of a moot point because my answer is going to be both for the late slate.
Yeah. Also, Dean Wade put up 31 fantasy points today, which I think in some respects more impressive than TJ McConnell's day.
Nah, Dean Wade. First of all, close relative to Dwayne Wade. Everybody knows that Dean Wade. Which
well, the family resemblance is obvious.
Yeah. I mean, compare. This is like we're talking about. It's the Eric the Actor conversation again. Who could tell the difference between the two of them? But yeah, I mean, Dean Wade though is kind of okay. Like he's had really strong rebound numbers since moving into the starting lineup, and I could just troll and say he's better than Andre Drummond too, which I don't actually think is the case, except that'll get the juices flowing. That'll get people upset.
Yeah, I think Dean Wade is a passable player who's benefited from stretching the floor today. And honestly, I hope Dean Wade, it's funny because they have Kevin Love coming back, who's like the best version of Dean Wade, but you kind of just want to see these Cavs get a shot. Like we know we're getting with Kevin Love, but Dean Wade being like competent or at least, growing into a role that's the poor man's Mike Muscala. I feel like I want to see Dean Wade achieve to that level, but that may be just me.
Yeah, it's Dean Wade looks like, the commercials where it's like, what's the commercial with Baker Mayfield where it's is it Baker Mayfield with, is it so the Hulu commercial where it's like here's Baker Mayfield with cable. Dean Wade looks like Kevin Love with cable. Like if you just look at his picture, especially on like FanDuel and DraftKings where it's just the headshot, that is exactly what he looks like. Like he's less attractive. He's like a smaller face for some reason. Like it just kind of gets cut off right around here, but he does kind of have a resemblance to Kevin Love.
And honestly, Dylan Windler, too, would be like the baby bear out of that three as well, where Dean Wade's mama bear, Kevin Love's papa bear, and then Dylan Windler's there being the little baby bear. And just, nice to see Cleveland have these interchangeable, arguably the most creative player lineup outside of Jared Allen at center. Even him, I feel like that's somebody I would make an NBA 2K and be like, yeah, let me give my guy a really cool fro and see how he does. Hopefully it helps his play out, makes him look taller, if nothing else. Any other sort of swaptimization thoughts here? I feel like just you're swaptimizing to one of Bazemore. That's a play we didn't know about earlier. THG can be even more of a viable late swap if we do get the news that Kuzma's out, but I think he's still fine. Though honestly, he's been on everybody's radar all day, so I assume everybody has their exposure there. But is there anything else, Greg, that you feel like is swaptimizable here if people do have 2 or 3 roster spots?
I think those are really the big ones. And then, I mean, once again, so Damian Jones is starting, not somebody I'm getting exposure to, and then still waiting on the Kuzma and Caruso news, which is going to impact everything.
Yep. So we'll keep you guys updated if there is any news here. Hopefully we'll get it throughout the course of the show, but if not, we will. We'll cry. We'll be sad alongside all you guys, but hopefully we'll have that Lakers news coming up soon here. And let's get to the next portion of things. We're going to flip the hat here, call it money time. And I don't think Chris has the cash register sound. So cha-ching, cha-ching. There we go. That's how it sounds roughly. I will, let's see, 2 hours ago, we're probably getting an ownership update for the night slate, but if we don't, or if we do, rather, I'll just update you guys. And there you go. There's a little sound effect. And Taylor Horton Tucker, #1 on DraftKings, according to our ownership projections at Awesemo.com. And of course, you can always get them yourself at Awesemo.com/join. Even the express packages have them in grade form. So be sure to check out all the packages that we have at Awesemo.com/join. A lot more affordable than you may realize. But #1 for the night slate, at least in the most recent run a couple hours ago, Taylor Horton Tucker, 83%. #2, Dennis Schroeder at 71%. #3, Markieff Morris at 68%. #4, Damian Lillard at 64%. And #5, Montrezl Harrell at 59%. And Greg, these projections were put up. They're going to be updated, I'm sure, not too far away because this tends to be how it goes on our shows. But I got to feel like Markieff Morris is the one that drops here, and Horton Tucker maybe drops a little bit. Where do you see Bazemore coming in amidst this top 5 where you currently have Horton Tucker projected for 83 and Morris projected for 68 on DraftKings?
So the one that I think drops the most is Montrezl Harrell since he's not starting.
Yes. Wait. Montrezl. Oh, you think he's going to drop under 59? He's still going to project well if you give him 23 minutes, though.
It's not like he's that cheap, though. I mean, I'm not saying that he's a terrible play, but I think is just before when you're asking about players whose ownership is going to change. I think Harrell's ownership is because he's so popular right now I think that ownership has to come down with news that he isn't in the starting lineup now. I don't think people are going to go to Damian Jones, but I think that people are going to go really heavy stars and scrubs, and the mid tier of players is going to become less of a priority as people jam in Steph Curry, jam in Damian Lillard, and then go to Bazemore, THT, Markieff Morris, depending how the Lakers news shakes out.
So do you find that's interesting that, and I get what you're saying there too, because I agree that people probably prefer to see him starting, even if not starting. I think yesterday not starting would have benefited him because just being away from LeBron is a plus for him. Being next to LeBron, like LeBron barely fed him the ball at all in that game. And if he did, it was just sort of the deep dive plays, like just DHOs, like nothing too important that was giving Harrell any meaningful touches yesterday. But I feel like Harrell, then I think what you're saying makes sense to me. I would force Harrell more because he's going to get minutes today. And he's also coming off one of the worst games he's had. And especially in an Anthony Davis without him situation, like I feel like Harrell might be undervalued then for the late slate if Greg's right here and the people are going to run away from him.
Yeah, so he is at 5,500 on DraftKings. On FanDuel, Harrell is priced at 6,400. I have him for 27 fantasy points right now. It's not a terrible projection, except there's so many better points per dollar plays, in my opinion, on this slate. Montrezl Harrell and Jovan Buha, who is a writer for The Athletic, he covers the Lakers. He wrote an article today that Montrezl Harrell is playing less minutes so far this season in the games that Anthony Davis has been out. Montrezl Harrell didn't play a whole lot of minutes yesterday either, and there's a reason for it, and he's a defensive liability, and the Lakers don't really like to have him out there quite as much without Anthony Davis there. They've been favoring Marc Gasol a little bit more. Obviously, there is no Marc Gasol, but there was no Marc Gasol yesterday, and Montrezl Harrell ended up playing, how many minutes was it in the start? He ended up playing 19 minutes in the start yesterday, and he's not even starting today. So I don't even think that Montrezl Harrell is a lock to play 24 or 25 minutes, given what we saw from yesterday, and that Damian Jones is starting over him. I gave him 21 minutes, and I don't think that's unreasonable.
I've got him at 23, which was also has been his projection, the last that I had pulled. And I think that's still the one that's on there now. And I feel like to me at that number, with his rates, and he has been the highest usage guy in games without LeBron and AD over the years. So that may be clouding my view on it a little bit, but I think Harrell, after the down game yesterday, like he was kind of a bad matchup for both the starting group and the bench group yesterday, where like Ayton was just making him look silly out there. He was basically, getting whatever he wanted in terms of rebounds. Also, had a couple easy looks at the rim. And then the second unit, you had Sarge playing center in there as well as having Kaminsky. So I guess you could really kind of say either guy playing center. And then in that spot, I think Harrell was also not a great fit. But against Sacramento, like what's the bad fit here? Is like Holmes going to kill him that bad? Holmes has been a fine player, but I don't think so. Or a second unit without Whiteside, who's going to be probably having Bielitsa at the 5 or Bagley at the 5. I think this is kind of the ideal Harrell get well spot. So I agree. Like the Athletic article, I know Adam was talking about in the deeper dive earlier, but I just feel like Harrell, to me, going back to him after that day yesterday was so bad. I just think makes some sense because he's been productive in 23 minutes before. I don't think he doesn't need to start to have that kind of success per minute.
Yeah, but it's just for me personally, it's hard to give him the minutes. 2 games ago against the Warriors, he played 11 minutes. It's just the playing time just hasn't been there for him. And there's other guys I'd rather get to. I know. So people are asking about FanDuel. What other guys would you get to? So you look at the FanDuel slate. Rashawn Holmes, I think, is a better play. Enes Kanter, I think, is a better play. Enes Kanter is cheaper than Montrezl Harrell. To me, that's crazy price, and that Harrell would be more expensive than Kanter. So I look at those guys, and then even on a points per dollar basis, I'd rather get to Wiseman. Except for the late slate on FanDuel, my priority plays at center would be Kanter 1, and then Rashawn Holmes 2.
Okay. Harrell, on DK, I think it's a different story. I could see on FanDuel that case being a little more logical, like a $2,000 difference though on DK. Like I'm willing to take the stab that Harrell can earn more minutes. So I don't know. That's me digging my heels in here. And Greg, yesterday we were all about Montrezl Harrell at captain. We both were there. And I don't know why you've turned at him so much. Is it because he embarrassed you publicly amongst all your friends, me and YouTube?
No, it's because he started yesterday. I thought he would play more minutes, and then the minutes just weren't there. So I was like, all right, he's just not going to play big minutes. So yesterday's what happened also is, remember, so Marc Gasol, that was the first game Gasol missed. So to me, logically, it made sense that even though Harrell has been playing reduced minutes with Anthony Davis out, not only was AD out, Marc Gasol was also out. So I looked at that and I was like, okay, Montrezl Harrell has to start and play 28 to 30 minutes now. Apparently that wasn't the case. He did not have to start and play that many minutes. He started and just didn't play very much. So maybe there's a little bit of bias on my end because he didn't play the minutes yesterday and it was the day that I was on him. But once again, now I'm just not giving him the minutes now.
Okay, fair. Harold to me is a guy. He's like a classic front runner guy where the matchup, if it fits him right, he's going to have the day. And so, like coming off of the game yesterday, we know Phoenix is good. We know they've been defensively sound. I feel like for him, this is the a great rebound spot, Greg, for him to get back on track to go with another basketball pun. Also, Kuzma starting. That news apparently coming through right now from our news god, and Alex Caruso out. So the starting lineup for the Lakers is official now: Schroeder, Caldwell Pope, Kuzma, Morris, Jones, and no Caruso. So, Greg, this is one of the situations we talked about. And we also got an updated ownership thanks to our CEO, Tom, grinding all hours of the day here for us. So we appreciate that. We'll give you guys the updated numbers in a second. But knowing that we know this now, Kuzma starting, no Caruso, how does this affect your views on both Kuzma and Taylor Horton-Tucker, who's now going to be playing with one less ball handler who could take possessions away in that second unit?
All right. So I am going to say Taylor Horton-Tucker plays 26 minutes. And if I'm going to give him that many minutes, it looks like I have him slightly ahead of Kent Bazemore. So ranking the value plays now, Taylor Horton-Tucker 1, Kent Bazemore 2, and the Markieff Morris 3rd of those 3 for me. So the priority is Bazemore and Taylor Horton-Tucker.
Kuzma, does he feel under-owned to you, given that, I mean, he was on the main slate, going to be 4%. We know he's starting now. I think just to go back to the Swaptimizer conversation, I feel like Swaptimizing the Kuzma wouldn't be the wildest move at all if you somehow had enough money. I don't know who would have enough money there. I guess maybe if you were switching off of Taylor Horton-Tucker and had one more higher dollar guy. But any thoughts overall on Kuzma relative to both the main slate ecosystem and the late slate?
Kuzma's price point at 5,800. I mean, I definitely think he's a little bit underpriced, but the only guy I'm rostering in that range that's left on the late games is Dennis Schroeder, and I strongly prefer Schroeder to Kuzma.
Okay. I wouldn't hate if you had Schroeder and utility switching some of that off to Kuzma, just because I think the upside is probably comparable for these guys. The median projection definitely favors Schroeder, but I feel like Kuzma, he's going to be lower owned than really anybody else we have left at this point. So that's one I would go to. And the updated ownership that we got for DraftKings, number 1 is Lillard now. Number 2 is Schroeder. Number 3 is Curry. Number 4 is Markieff Morris. And number 5 now is Taylor Horton-Tucker down to 49.5%. And Bazemore, just to close the loop on that one, he's at 41%. Of course, you get all the numbers yourself at awesemo.com/join. For the FanDuel late slate, the number 1 owned guy is drastically different. Harrison Barnes at 71%. Damian Lillard at 71% as well. Steph Curry, number 3 at 63. Number 4 is Draymond Green at 55%. And number 5 is Andrew Wiggins on FanDuel to slightly lower 55%. Greg, give me your thoughts on Harrison Barnes on FanDuel, because I'm not playing the FanDuel night slate today, and I did not know that he would be a core play for so many people.
So Harrison Barnes is the most expensive small forward on FanDuel. Who would you guess is the second most expensive small forward on FanDuel without looking at the pricing? Because once you figure out what the answer is, you'll see why Harrison Barnes' ownership is so high.
Is it Carmelo?
It is Derrick Jones Jr.
Oh, okay.
So no issue with Harrison Barnes' ownership on FanDuel, because there just aren't other options.
I wouldn't mind a Carmelo and Bazemore small forward group. I feel like Bazemore still, he's not quite as much of a value play on FanDuel, but those guys are both under 45%. I don't know. I'm just not as big of a Barnes believer, and I don't see the numbers like Buddy Hield's in today. I don't know why I know he had the outlier day recently when he was going to be a chalky play, but I'm just not that confident in Barnes at any price point.
So I do think he's a little bit overpriced on FanDuel at 6,800. Alex has him projected for 32 fantasy points. I have him for right around 33, but it's just a factor of the other guys don't project well on a points per dollar basis either. And it's a slate where there's enough value that it's not hard to get up to 6,800 for Harrison Barnes. So I don't think 6,800, if you were to give me a full slate of Harrison Barnes, not a play that I'm strongly desiring to get to, but for this particular 2-game slate, no issue with it.
Okay. That jumped out to me as one that I wouldn't mind moving away from, but I get it if you want to spend all the money. I just don't think it'd be the worst idea if you were playing a lot of Barnes to put in some lineups, just drop down to the other 2 small forwards, some sort of rotation of Carmelo and Derrick Jones, and then Bazemore there as value. But That's neither here nor there. For the showdown, the top owned plays are looking like, let me just make sure I got the most recent one. Number one on DraftKings overall ownership, this is not the captain or utility. Damian Lillard at 82%. Number two, Steph Curry at 76%. Number three, Enes Kanter at 47%. Number four is Andrew Wiggins at 38%. And number five is Draymond Green at 37%. Greg, those five guys on DraftKings, Wiggins, Curry, Kanter, Draymond, and Lillard, who stands out there and why is it Andrew Wiggins?
So actually with Kelly Oubre being out, I think we have to give some of that usage over to Andrew Wiggins. The other thing also that I think is pretty interesting, we're talking about both showdown and the main slate. It looks like Damian Lillard is going to be a decent amount more popular than Steph Curry on just across the board for all contests, late slate, main slate, showdown. I have the projections really close now that Kelly Oubre is out for the Warriors, because you look at the other players now that the Warriors are starting, it is not high usage guys. So Steph Curry and Damian Lillard, this is going to be a really fun game to watch because I think both these guys are probably in store for like 40% usage rates.
Jacob Kimball asking, Spags, is it okay to have money left over for the late slate? I feel like it probably is. Normally for the most part for a main slate, I'm running my optimizations with a 49,800 cap on DraftKings and not too far off on FanDuel. But I don't feel like that's the worst thing to leave some money, especially today where there's so much value.
Yeah, so especially for FanDuel on the 2-game slates, I definitely think it's a fine idea to leave salary on the table, because if a lineup wins for a 2-game slate on FanDuel that doesn't leave salary on the table, you're splitting. There's no situation where a lineup isn't leaving salary on the table. It isn't going to be split amongst like hundreds, if not thousands of people. So to even give yourself a chance to win a GPP on FanDuel, outright win, then yeah, you really do have to differentiate yourself by leaving salary on the table. That's the easiest way to differentiate yourself, unless you're just playing just a total Hail Mary play on a guy who's like not even normally in the rotation. You're hoping for like a crazy blowout or something. I think leaving salary on the table for 2-game slates on FanDuel, that's wise in my opinion for tournaments.
I'm going to give out the FanDuel single game ownership in a second, but Greg, if you had to guess, how many shots do you think John Wall's put up, given that there's still 7.5 minutes left in the game in the fourth quarter?
I have no point of reference for this. I'm just going to say 20.
27 shots. He's shooting 11 for 27. He is, shooting the Rockets into the game or keeping it close, but that is a lot of, he and Oladipo both are just gunning today, which is going to happen, I guess, when you don't have Eric Gordon out there, but
good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Happy for John Wall.
Yeah. He's trying for my fantasy lineups.
He is trying. Somebody tilting about Patton. Patton ends up being a great play, and Sterling Brown shits the bed. I know one of your debates you had earlier with Josh, Greg, and now you could see it come to fruition that Justin Patton was still the better play, apparently.
Yeah, I have. I'm fine with it. I have 30% Patton on DraftKings and 20% on FanDuel. I'm fine with him playing well.
Also, Carter Williams is crushing. My lineups are all over the place, where I have like these guys who are having amazing days at under 5% ownership. Wall is under 10% in some of the tournaments I'm in, and then just Bay and Collins there doing absolutely nothing. It's maddening sometimes.
There are definitely some. There's going to be a lot of lineups I feel like that score a lot of points, and there's just going to be one guy who it's like, how come this guy's in this lineup scoring 18 fantasy points and everybody else destroyed in that lineup?
That's the nature of DFS, especially on a 10-game slate where we had so much news and so many lineups and plays really that you didn't know about. I know we were talking about the Detroit game earlier, and that really was to me like Lord of the Flies, where just anybody's going to grab whatever they can get, and that ended up being the case. The FanDuel single game ownership, though, hit this real fast. Damian Lillard 81%, Steph Curry at 69%, rounded up, so not so nice. Enes Kanter number 3 at 57%, number 4 Gary Trent at 33%, and number 5 is Draymond. And then at the MVP spot there, it's a lot of Damian Lillard, a lot of Steph Curry. Same thing for the captain spots on DraftKings. Greg, out of the 5 here top owned plays for the FanDuel single game slate with Lillard, Curry, Kanter, Trent, Draymond, does one of them stand out as being a tier below the other 4?
Trent seems a tier below the other guys. I definitely don't have him projected for nearly as many fantasy points as those other names that you mentioned. So that's it's interesting to see him own that high for sure, but I guess it's just really a price point thing.
All right, Brad Levine and the premium Slack asking Draymond or Cancer for Showdown. We'll take some questions from the Slack and the YouTube chat, so get them in, and I'll be going back and forth here. Don't spam your question though, because we'll see them here. The chat's not flying by like on a normal Live Before Lock. But Brad here asking Draymond or Cancer for Showdown. I presume that means on DraftKings. Greg, I would favor Cancer, but do you have any sort of strong lean between Draymond and Cantor?
No, I'm on the same page with you. I prefer Cantor. So Draymond's his numbers at playing at center have been really good so far this year. And if you remember, he got off to a pretty slow start from a fantasy perspective. And then what happened was after Kevon Looney and James Wiseman got hurt, all of a sudden we just saw Draymond Green start to destroy. And I think a lot of it was just because with him playing those center minutes, it really opened up the offense. It really allowed him to really facilitate everything. I mean, he's essentially playing point guard for them. However, now, if we look at some of the games without them, now that those guys are back, last game, although did he leave that game with an injury? Yeah, he left that game with an ankle injury. But even when he was on the court, he played 13 minutes. He only had 2 assists in that game. I know 2 games ago he had 19 assists. I'm a little worried about his assist rate going forward now that he isn't going to be holding down the center minutes to himself. I mean, overall, it's not like I think this totally tanks Draymond Green's fantasy value, except the issue is that he's priced up a lot from where he was when he wasn't playing center a couple weeks ago. So give me Enes Kanter there, and I think that Draymond Green takes a little bit of a step back going forward versus what we've seen over the last couple weeks.
So for my one, or I actually did 2 of the night slate lineups tonight just to get a little bit in there and to try to defray some of my frustrations with the main slate. And I actually put in one lineup with Draymond and one lineup with Cantor because I loved the rest of the lineup and felt like that was a decision-making point. So it was sort of where I landed with it. And one thing that jumped out to me with Draymond in court time without Kelly Oubre, he does lose a little bit in assist upside. He's got a 34.4% rate compared to 37% rate normally. And it can be a difference sometimes, especially for a guy at Draymond's price, but he does get a little bit of an uptick in usage up to 14% from 12.5. So I think it kind of comes out in the wash there, but both guys to me seem like very comparable plays. I guess the one question you could ask though is any fear at all that they go old school on Cantor and just kind of get him in the switch and then immediately just get him played off the floor because he cannot defend sometimes in the pick and roll, and especially on the Steph Curry threes. I feel like that's historically always been where he has been absolute death.
Let me just check this really quick because I think that they played each other recently and Cantor played a bunch of minutes.
He's been better defensively this year too. Like he's actually one of the better defenders in terms of D rating on all of Portland, which isn't saying much because they're all terrible, but 109 D rating is not bad.
They're 28th in the league in defensive efficiency, but they're so thin on big men. And then, so against the Warriors, never mind, they didn't play. I don't know why I thought they played the Warriors recently. But yeah, I mean, the minutes for Cantor have been relatively consistent in close games, so I'm not too concerned about it. Last game against the Hornets, he played 24 and a half minutes. That game was also a blowout. It was decided by 12 minutes, and the starters didn't finish out the game. But game before that against the Lakers, 35 minutes. Against Denver, 38 minutes. Game against Phoenix, that was a blowout, so I don't put too much weight into that. But he played 28 minutes. The game was decided by 32 points. Competitive games before that, 34 minutes, 31, 33. Enes Kanter's minutes, I think, are pretty solid. I don't really see a situation where he's getting played off the court.
And then for a showdown captain, Greg, which way would you want to go here? Because as I mentioned, we are going to have a ton of ownership going to Lillard, a ton of ownership going to Curry. Both guys obviously in great spots, and you couldn't fault you for going to either guy because I think the ceiling there is pretty strong. But would you want to go to a Covington, a Cantor, a Draymond? Even I know you like the cheapies a little more captain than I do. Bazemore and just jamming all the guys in. Does anybody else speak to you meaningfully, a captain besides Steph or Damian Lillard?
If I had to roster somebody else, it would be Bazemore if I was going cheap. But I don't think we have to for this slate. It's not like some of the other slates where we've had so many stars to pay up for, where you could just jam them all in if you get somebody cheap in there. It's Lillard and Curry are the only 2 expensive pay up options, so it's easy enough to just roster one of them as the captain and then just go cheap, plug in Bazemore and some of the other viable cheaper options at other spots. So I don't think we have to for this slate.
Let's see. There's some questions here. So Jacob asking, is Jones at center a good play, or is he just a decoy for Harrell? I don't love Jones a ton here. I mean, he's starting and they did give him minutes yesterday. I mean, he did meaningfully take minutes away from Harrell in that game that we talked about at some more length earlier, with Harrell looking both mismatched on really against the first group and the second group. But I just don't see Jones having a ton of success early. And I guess if he does, I don't know. He's still a 5x projection for me, but I just would rather have Harrell. I'm making my bet with Harrell tonight. But Jones at minimum salary, I don't think you can go I don't think you can go meaningfully wrong playing him there, but there's just better value. So that's really the main reason I'm not getting a Damian Jones.
Yeah, so I think the real impact of Damian Jones starting is it takes away from Montrezl Harrell because we know that Damian Jones has to get minutes. Remember, we were talking about him yesterday, and we were talking about Damian Jones as a potential value, but we didn't even know if he was going to get in the game, right? We thought that was up in the air, and Jared Dudley ended up playing some center minutes. Damian Jones, as long as he's starting, he has to play minutes. Even if he comes out at the first whistle, the first and second half, that's still, we're giving him 8 or 9 minutes. So those are that's playing time that's going to have to come from Harrell because I doubt they're going to share the court. It's going to be either or on the court at all times, and I don't think Harrell plays all of the minutes that Damian Jones doesn't get. So just for that reason, I think that's the real impact there is taking away from Harrell.
Yeah, and Harold Awesemo has for 23 minutes, Damian Jones for 17 minutes, and then as Greg mentioned, Jared Dudley for 10, so maybe some overlap there with some of these guys. But yeah, I mean, I still would favor Harold just because I think he's going to be heavy usage when the minutes he's out there, and certainly playing when you have a profile chronicling why you're not a good fit to play in the Athletic. Like if ever there's a narrative, maybe that's a reason why he should beat up on Sacramento. But that's just me hoping to get the downswing. Eric Johnson asking thoughts on Covington on DK. I like Covington again. I don't think he's in as much of a smash spot. The other day where talked about why he benefited quite a bit from a matchup where the team gave up a lot of assisted threes. He ended up having also a nice rebounding day, all that stuff. Covington looks fine to me, and I think he's playable more for the showdown than he is for the actual night slate. But Greg, do you have any sort of strong feeling here for Covington? His price is up enough where I wouldn't be mad if you were just like, I don't want to play him at this price.
He's a little bit too expensive for me. I didn't really get to him in any format today. And then, like I said, also there's so much value on the slate. So main slate, Covington's certainly too expensive to swap to, in my opinion. Just for the late slate, the issue that I have with them is that there is so much value that I think it makes sense to go stars and scrubs, right? You get up to Lillard and Curry wherever you can, mix the Aaron Fox in. And I think that some of those mid-range plays, such as Robert Covington, I think that they just kind of get pinched for me. It's a little bit different on FanDuel just because there's so few power forward options that it's hard to totally get away from them. But even so, I'd rather roster Draymond Green. I'd rather roster Marvin Bagley. I'd rather roster Kyle Kuzma. So to me, Covington would be the 4th priority at power forward on FanDuel for the late slate.
So here's a swap-tomizing question from It's Really Me Lane in the premium Slack saying, for a DK single entry and cash main slate, would you keep Steph and Kent Bazemore or THT or change Steph into like 2 mid-range guys? I mean, I don't. He asked like if the latter, what 2 guys? So his options that he would go to are Dennis Schroeder or Green. I don't know. If you have any thoughts, Greg, feel free to give them.
Yeah, I don't even care who the 2 mid-range guys are. It would be Steph and THT.
Yeah, I think at this point you're probably just trying to capture the upside, and you have 2 obvious value plays. So I think that's where I would go as well. Fargo guy also asking a question I'm sure a lot of people are confused by, and he says, I'm confused. THT or Bazemore is the better late play. I think we're both in agreement that you should be playing them both for the night slate itself.
Yeah, so the other thing that does make it a little bit confusing too is that we've had so many different iterations of value come out. By that I mean, when the slate first started, THT was a really good play. Bazemore wasn't on anybody's roster because Kelly Oubre, we didn't know whether he was playing or not. Then to me, Kelly Oubre got ruled out and I was like, okay, I like Bazemore more than Taylor Norton Tucker. And then we had Caruso get ruled out and it's like, okay, now I'm giving extra minutes to Taylor Norton Tucker. So I like him more than Bazemore again. So right there, what I'm saying in total is I agree for the late slate, what you said right there. I think you want to play ideally both Kent Bazemore and Taylor Norton Tucker. For the main slate, though, Taylor Norton Tucker, now that Alex Caruso is out, is a higher priority for me than Kent Bazemore. But ideally, I think you want to get exposure to both of them.
Here's an interesting little exchange here, and why we appreciate the chat when the guys are helping each other out and actually talking about stuff. But Kyle John asking, why is everybody so high on THT? And then our pal Steven Leibovitz chiming in with the hard data. Horton Tucker without LBJ and AD is 1.14 DK points on 156 minutes. Goes up more without Caruso and Gasol, but fewer minutes. So that's basically why this is the case. I talked about the rate data as well. In that same sample size that I think Steven is referencing, Horton Tucker, about a 25% usage rate, 25% assist rate. So he just does a little bit more of everything in a way that's meaningful, and he should have more minutes because of not having LeBron out there. That said, the pathway for him having a monster day was Kuzma not being in. Now he's just, I think, a very solid value play along the same lines of Bazemore, but with less secure minutes.
Yeah. So the other thing too is in case people were watching at the top or they weren't listening, because I don't pretend that people hang on every word I said, but I say I think Taylor Horton Tucker, I have him project for 26 minutes today. I have him scoring over a fantasy point per minute as his baseline with no LeBron and Anthony Davis in there. And then we also have to consider a matchup against the Kings. The Kings are dead last in the NBA in defensive efficiency. So you match all of that stuff together, and Taylor Horton Tucker's price. So it's not like we're looking for 30 or 40 fantasy points out of Taylor Horton Tucker. For his salary, if we're able to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 25-ish fantasy points, he ends up being a very good points per dollar play. And considering it's a 2-game slate that we're talking about here, where we're trying to find as much value as we can to pay up for guys like Damian Lillard and Steph Curry, Taylor Horton Tucker is the easiest path to be able to fit those guys into lineups.
I agree. Harden on the court in a blowout. So in this time frame that I asked Greg how many shots he thought John Wall had, and it was I think an 8-point game. It's now over a 20-point game, and it's been 3 minutes of court time. So Brooklyn is really just a deadly team in every possible way.
Yeah, I see people very upset in there also. I guess some people who didn't play James Harden wondering, why is James Harden still on the court? I couldn't tell you why James Harden is still on the court, but that's just kind of what the Nets do sometimes.
Yeah, and I think in this spot in particular, I guess you get it more, though. Certainly, if Harden got hurt, they would look awfully silly. But whatever. As long as he's healthy and fine, why not let him show off here before Houston retires his jersey? Because I guess all the bad will that went that way is now completely gone.
That's actually kind of weird. Will they retire the jersey of a guy who forcibly asked to get off the team?
They said there was like a news item about it that they were going to retire it.
Do you know the story about the strip club that retired James Harden's number?
I actually made that joke earlier today, but I don't know if you're making a joke or if this is actually a thing.
No, yeah. So there's a strip club in Houston that he spent $1 million at in one night. And at the end of the night, they hung his jersey up in the rafters. Somebody went out and got his jersey and they hung it up, and it just lives there. If you go online and search it, James Harden retired number, you could find the strip club with James Harden's jersey hanging in the rafters.
I would not be mad at that life. And I feel like, honestly, James Harden, with now what we know of him as an assist man, a guy who's willing to share the rock, like going to a strip club with James Harden would really be the apex of any of our lives.
Yeah, which, I know he has a lot of money, but like $1 million, that is so much money. I hope it was all in singles also, but that is so much money to spend in one night at a strip club. Like, what could you, I don't even understand what you could spend $1 million on.
Just a lot of throwing it up in the air like LeBron's powder. I think is basically it. And also, clearly, I would say some under the table favors.
Yeah. Well, that too. But still, $1 million worth. That's I don't know.
He's prolific. He's a prolific shooter. That's what we know about him more than anything. Well, listen to Premium Slack asking for the main slate. Would you swap out Markieff Morris for Bazemore? I don't think it's the worst idea. I think having Kuzma playing alongside Markieff also makes him a little less appealing. There's enough room for these guys to all get there, but I think just for the main slate, people won't be on Bazemore enough. So I don't hate going to Markieff. Greg, how do you feel about it?
So I'm looking. What was the exact question?
For the main slate, would you swap out Morris for Bazemore?
Yeah, I have Bazemore project for more fantasy points.
It's closer for me. I think I have Bazemore. I have Bazemore 24.6, Markieff at 24.4, but I just think you're going to get a lot less ownership. Markieff was projected for 26% ownership on the main slate earlier, so you got to assume there's going to be a good amount of that hanging out. Bazemore, people are not swapping to enough, or as much as they should, myself included. Collins, foul number 5. Thank you, over under, for letting me know that.
That's by the way, that's my favorite thing he's ever posted in the Slack chat now. Not the Slack chat, the YouTube chat.
Oh God, John Collins, really, I hope he gets traded now. I hope he doesn't. And I hope he has no fun during the All-Star game in Atlanta. That's really, I hope they all leave him out of all the events and don't let him hang out with anybody. And he doesn't get to go to a strip club with James Harden. That's what I'm hoping for. Yeah.
Or either that or you hope he goes to the strip club and he gets COVID and then he doesn't play for the next 3 weeks.
Yeah, I hope he has one of those real tough COVIDs. Like, not when obviously no ill will to him, but one of those ones where he's like, oh man, I was feeling it for weeks. Like, oh, it was awful.
Just enough so it hurts his cardio and he can't play extended minutes for the rest of the season.
Exactly. And then we could see Onyeka Okongwu have more run, and I can hate him just as much. Greg, give the people the plugs here. We got about 1 minute left to lock, but we've covered everything we need to. So where can people see you next?
I don't know, asking for the plugs. I feel like you're setting me up for another James Harden joke. But yeah, just follow me on Twitter at Ehrenberg DFS. Be doing the Jock Market show tomorrow with somebody. The schedule isn't finalized, but yeah, I'll be doing that show tomorrow with some combination of either EMAC, or it could be Eric, it could be Josh. It's up in the air. The schedule, it's still unknown, but I'll be doing live before lock. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will know whenever we go live that the show has begun and I will be with somebody.
Thank you for keeping the shilling to a minimum for me, but hit that like button on the way out, guys. Check me out tomorrow on the tip-off with Kayla and Ben Ross again. I always enjoy that three-man weave that I get, or three-person weave, excuse me. And then I'll be back tomorrow on the Late Slate Show, I believe, with Eric Lindquist. So come back tomorrow in our farewell to the NBA before the All-Star break. We appreciate all you guys hanging out. Hope you have a great Late Slate and Showdown. We'll see you guys again soon. Bye.